Hello and welcome to Nerdy for Nerds by Nerds. I am hanging out with Mark Greenberg today, and we're going to be talking about some Frag games with the latest Kickstarter, Necropolis. How are you doing today?
I'm doing phenomenally, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. If you'd be so kind to kind of just tell people a little bit about yourself and who you are, I guess.
Sure. So I'm sort of, I think, a relatively rare breed because I spent most of my gaming career on the consumer side of the table. I've been playing for a very long time. I go back to Gen Con at University of Wisconsin Parkside for those who want to look up that. And I've been a consumer. That being said, I was also the forever DM of my group. So I've been creating campaign worlds and all that kind of stuff for many years. But I had like a real job in the real world. And then about 3.5 years ago or so, I decided I'd had enough and I was done. And I retired. And I posted on Facebook that I had just given notice to my firm that I was going to leave at the end of the year. And one of the first comments I got was from Bill Webb, who's the principal owner at Frog Games, which also owns Necromancer Games, which is the company that Necropolis is being published by. And Bill said, "Hey, Mark, you want to write for me?" And I was like, sure. I mean, I've been a DM forever, but I've got absolutely no published work to my name at all. But if you want to take a shot at me, having me do something, what the heck, sounds like fun. And so I kind of thought he was basically joking. And then lo and behold, I get a call from Bill sometime later, and he says, "Okay, I got my first project for you. Do you want to do the book that's going to be the sort of compendium of my campaign world, which is the Lost Lands for those who know it?" And I'm like, I guess I don't really know what that involves, but sure. And turns out, he gets me on a Zoom call, and actually might have been Skype. And I've got like 6 authors and several people from the company on this thing, and I'm supposed to be project managing this monster. And for those who don't know, Frog God Games, Necromancer Games has been publishing for a long time, and all of their adventures, not all, but almost all their adventures, are based in this world of the Lost Lands. And so you've got to coordinate all of these adventures and put them all into one massive book that works for the whole world. And so I ended up spending about a year and a half of my life, and it's this thing. It's that thick. But I got my name on it with Bill, and it was a blast, and I had a lot of fun, and it was incredibly complicated. Um, and that was my first project in sort of the tabletop role playing industry. And then it was time for another project. And he said, "I got another one for you. And I want you to rewrite a work by Gary Gygax called Necropolis." So Bill is there's one or two things going on. Either Bill thinks I'm relatively decent at this, or he's asked everybody else he knows to do this stuff, and everybody else has said no. I'm the only one willing to say yes. So that's my background in the gaming industry. I'm a relative newbie at this, and it's been an absolute blast to actually get to be on the other side of the table for once, producing stuff and not just consuming it.
Did you have experience as a project manager before?
Well, okay, so dirty secret, sorry everybody. I was a lawyer. I was a business lawyer for 26 years, and that's a lot of. Frankly, that's toward the end of my career, that's almost all it was. It was working with teams of people and organizing things and making sure that we could get a project done. I was a business lawyer, so we were either working on contracts or acquisitions or other types of stuff like that. And it's project management. It's not something that we're ever taught, of course, but you have to learn it. Um, There is a little difference, however, between trying to get a team of lawyers to get something done and a team of creative nerds. The term that was used was nerd wrangling.
Yeah.
And it is a little different. Plus, the other thing that I'm always sensitive to is that almost everybody who has been working with me on this, and for Lost Lands, World Lost Lands, I was working with authors, editors, the art coordinator, cartographers. um, you know, you have to recognize whenever you do this, the vast majority of people in this industry, they're doing this on the side for fun. This is not their career. Even the artists involved are only doing art for, some of them are school teachers, some of them are younger, people who may still be in school. Others do art for all sorts of things, or they have Etsy stores and the like. This is only part of what they do, and so I always had to be sensitive to the fact that their career isn't responding to me, and I shouldn't expect, if I send an email, I should get what I want in 10 minutes. It's not realistic. It's not fair for people. So it was a different experience. But yeah, it's the coordination is a huge part of the job, because I didn't do this by myself. I didn't just sit down and write it, and that was it. I had a whole bunch of people to work with, and even for the Kickstarter, trying to work with the folks at Frog, what are we going to offer as stretch goals, or what are we going to, because the goal is to offer cool things, but not offer anything that's going to screw up performing the Kickstarter and getting it done on time, because that is the number one mission. Well, the number one mission is to get the game out and have it be phenomenal and high quality book and all that kind of stuff. The second part is get it out on time. And then the third part is have some interesting stretch goals and other stuff that you can reach, but none of them have to screw things up. And there's a lot of project management in that, pricing things out, thinking about shipping. Shipping is really challenging right now.
On many levels, I hear.
Yeah. Well,
we haven't had to do it in a little bit, but yeah, it's gotten interesting out there. I would say there's a fourth thing too, is like also when you're adding them stretch goals, not only do you have to worry about what you're going to do to your deadlines and getting the project, still finishing the project on time, but you also don't want to price yourself out of a profitable Kickstarter, right?
That's right.
We do these Kickstarters and it's to make the thing, but also like a lot of companies, and the bigger the company is, I feel like the more that this Kickstarter also goes towards funding the company forward and the next project, and having it so that, instead of having nothing done when you do the Kickstarter because you didn't have any money, you're so much further along in the project when you do your next one.
That's exactly right. I mean, look, the fundamental truth is that, nobody is making a fortune, with maybe one or two exceptions, in this industry. But you have to be successful. You have to make some profit. And some of that profit can go to the owners, but a lot of it goes getting plowed back into the company for future projects. There's got to be some profitability in it, or you can't keep doing it. Most of the people who own small, mid-sized companies, they either have or had other jobs, and this was simply something that they did, in addition. But for us, the artwork is all done. There's no artwork left to do. The cartography is all done. There's no cartography left to do. Those people had to be paid. They were already paid. We didn't use Kickstarter funds to do that. We had to have the funds to do that in advance. And the Kickstarters that gotten in trouble are often the ones where they need the money to actually fund parts of it that have not been performed. And while that doesn't necessarily mean you should not back those kinds of Kickstarters, there's a greater risk there, because costs can rise. People that you engage might have changes in circumstances and can't actually satisfy them.
They're probably learning as they go.
Well, and fewer Kickstarters these days. I mean, that was certainly the case, especially in the beginning. I mean, I can't tell you how many Kickstarters I backed early on, and a number of them never performed because they did bite off more than they can chew, because they just didn't know. Now most people doing this have a good sense for how do you do it and make it work.
Yeah, I was speaking more to like the newer companies that are getting started, and they're within their first few Kickstarters.
Yeah,
because like we've only done one so far, and the main objective when doing the next one is to not repeat any of the mistakes of the first one.
Right. Well, and the good news is you won't repeat any of those mistakes. You'll find brand new mistakes to make that you'd never thought of before. Yeah, no, that happens every time. Every time something goes wrong, the key is to make sure that nothing that goes wrong makes, sort of kills the Kickstarter or kills the company. A couple of mistakes are not the end of the world. But I mean, Steve Jackson Games just announced that they're losing money on their most recent Kickstarter because shipping costs rose. They'd gone out, they'd asked, they'd gotten money from people already through BackerKit or whatever, and then lo and behold, shipping goes up. And at that point, you can't ask for more money. So you just, you take it. It's a loss. And a larger company, and they've got enough money, apparently they'll be able to absorb it. Small company might not be able to.
They'd just be shuttering their doors pretty much.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a challenge to manage these things. And so project management is not just at this point managing the getting it done. It's making sure that it's done in a way that you can actually get it out the door.
So what is your role with Necropolis?
So as I said, Lost Lands is done. I take a little bit of break, and then we're banding about ideas, and at some point Bill says, well, I think the next thing we want to get out is Necropolis. And I remembered Necropolis. It was originally written, it was written by Gary Gygax. Apparently it was initially sort of bandied about in his New Infinities company, which published a couple of things before it went out of business. And eventually Necropolis was published in 1992 by Game Designers Workshop in Gary's Dangerous Journeys system. It was then, after that, about a decade later or so, was bought by Necromancer Games. And they published in 2002 a third edition version, D20 version of Necropolis. So it's been a long time. 2002 is a long time ago. And so Bill thought it was time, since they had the IP to reissue it. And so he said, I want you to project manage this. I said, okay, fine, that's fine. I know how to do that now. And, he said, and, make whatever changes you want to it, go ahead. It's sort of your project, whatever you want to do. I said, well, how's the manuscript? What's the status? Oh, it's totally done. It's like, that's cool. Who did it? And I never quite got exactly an answer to that one. And then I finally got a copy of it. I hope Bill's not watching this right now, probably going to throttle me. Basically, it was the original manuscript with Bill's annotations of what needed to change, in his view. So the manuscript wasn't really done. And so I basically sat down with this thing and I just started reading it. And I read it through a couple of times. And I said, yeah, this needs some work. And look, I don't, this is not to disparage at all, obviously, Gary, who is a talent that I will never aspire to. But it read a lot like a 1992 adventure in many ways. How adventures were done that way. There were some strange mismatches I felt in some of the encounters. I felt there were some rooms that were, it's almost seemed as if he'd sort of run out of ideas, and there was overuse of certain tropes. And I just said, you know what? I'm just going to rewrite the whole thing. Now, that being said, the plot's basically the same, although I did change some key aspects there, but the plot's basically the same. The characters are basically the same, although I changed a few things and some motivations. So this is still Necropolis. I mean, this is not, this was not like, hey, go write an adventure. It was take this adventure and update it, revise it, change it. There's probably not a single sentence in the thing that has not been modified to some extent. But I really tried to update it and make it work. But I also tried to retain the old school flavor to it. So it's still very much sort of that old school flavor, but it's in a much more updated format than I feel like it was initially. So, and then of course, what we did in addition to sort of rewriting the whole thing, we had new maps made, completely done. Robert Altbauer did a whole bunch of the maps, and Alyssa Faden, who has her own presence, extensive presence on social media, and has done some incredible maps before, did the map of and hopefully this isn't a spoiler, the final tomb in the adventure. And it is just an insane map that she made. I mean, it is just incredible. We had all new artwork commissioned, although what we ended up doing in the book, because the original had cool color cover, but all the interior was black and white. We're doing a full color version. So I kept almost all of the black and white art, and it's still in the book. But we added a whole bunch of pieces of new full color artwork that, if you look at the Kickstarter, again, just phenomenal stuff. And I'm really happy with that. So this is not just the old version converted the way, like WotC did with some of the old first edition modules where they converted them to 5e. This really is a somewhat of a reimagining of the old thing, and this took me about a year total.
What is the underlying theme or premise for the adventure?
All right, so it was originally set in when Gary wrote it originally for Dangerous Journeys. He had a world, and Gary sort of liked doing this in a lot of his things. It was in the world of Aerth, Aerth. So we just reversed the E and the A. And then the country it was in was Egypt, Aegypt.
Really stretching the imagination.
Exactly. Well, I mean, remember, Greyhawk was in the world of Orth, Oerth.
Yeah,
so that's sort of Gary's thing. When Necromancer bought it, and this of course was part of the complication, it was moved into the world of the Lost Lands. And so in my Lost Lands book, there's a whole section on the country of Kemet, which is where this is set. This is an Egyptian mummy type adventure. You've seen the movies, there's a lot of the same tropes, but there's a lot of different things. Gary's original intention, I'm told, was to make an adventure that one-upped Tomb of Horrors, the infamous Tomb of Horrors. And there are some similarities in the final dungeon to that. That was one of the areas I actually focused a lot on, because Tomb of Horrors is a great tournament module. If you've played it or you've DM'd it, if you're taking characters into it who you just grabbed as pre-gens and you want to see how far you can make it before you die, it's a wonderful adventure. If you're taking beloved characters, it just sucks. Because
it's going to grind them up.
It's going to kill your beloved characters. And sometimes it's just dumb luck. You just do the wrong thing and something terrible happens. There were a couple places in Necropolis that were like that had to be modified. I felt, in my view, if you're playing characters that you have grown up around and love and whatever, and you've brought them up from first level, you don't want them to die randomly because you push the lever up and not down and there was no way to figure out which was which. That being said, if you go into the room and you push the lever up and you don't look at it, you don't study it, then yeah, I think dying is totally appropriate. If that's how you want to play, this is intended to be a really challenging adventure. And if you spend time, you should be able to figure out what the right answer should be. You should be able to bias things, for yourself. This is, what I kept in this, is this whole thing is an adventure that will be a challenge not just for higher level characters, but for players who are pretty experienced. You're going to have to be thoughtful and careful and spend your time thinking before you act. If you blunder into a room, you're probably going to be in trouble in this. Now, there is a lot of lead up, because the way this works is, I mean, and I would guess, having play tested just, episodes of it, I did not play test the whole thing straight through, because I'm guessing it would take months if you were playing once a week to actually get through all this material. There's a village to explore, there's overland encounters, there's a bunch of structures before you even get to before you get to the Necropolis to explore. The Necropolis has all sorts of tombs, and you got to find the one tomb. And then you've got a lengthy period in that one tomb to try to find out what's going on, and if you're lucky, defeat the big bad at the end. But it is intended to be a challenge for even good players, but there's time to sort of learn and develop as you go, to hopefully by the time you get to the end, you'll get it that you need to be thoughtful and careful. And if you are, I still think you might die, but you should have a good shot at winning.
The earlier adventures were more designed to test the players than the characters per se. In D&D, and as the game is kind of advanced, it's moved more towards testing the characters and not necessarily the players as much. And also, I found I don't know if it's a Gygax thing or if it was just like the earlier adventures. Like, those things that were more brutal tended to be insidious, in the sense that you had to really work hard to do the thing that would then ultimately just kill you. Getting into the sphere of annihilation was kind of hard, right? But that's what made it so enticing, is because you want to figure out how to do it, and
right.
And if it's just hard to do it, there must be something good on the other side, and it's oh no, you're just dead.
Yeah, and I tried to make sure there wasn't anything quite like that, but no spoilers here. There are no spheres of annihilation anywhere in Necropolis, so don't worry about it. But this is meant to challenge
cubes. On the other hand, that is completely different.
They could be any number of other shapes. Yeah. I wanted this to be a playable adventure, but it does challenge the players as much as the characters. You cannot just solve this stuff through magic or saying I make skill rolls and you you get to the end. If you're not thinking and thoughtful about the rooms, I play tested this with, among other groups, my home group, which I DM. So they know my DM style. They know the kind of adventures I write. I know them really well. And they did really well through, they played through a number of sections, and then we got to the tomb at the end, and they were doing pretty well. And then they sort of blundered into a room that, they got lucky in how they got in there, because it could have been a lot worse, but they weren't really prepared. And we ended up finishing at about midnight, because people had to go to bed, because I think the next day was a work day probably. And so we had to call it quits. But they were in the middle of a combat that was almost certainly, in my view, a TPK at that point. And that was because they weren't really fully prepared. And a couple things that happened that were sort of, and again, I don't want to go into any spoilers. There are a couple things that had happened to the party that made it more challenging for them. They lost the ability for a couple of the players to actually be useful in the room, and that really put them at a huge disadvantage. But had they been a little more thoughtful, then maybe they would have done better. So this is intended to challenge the player too. So in that regard, it is more old school. You can't just say, I make my rolls to see if I make my perception or whatever. So
all the worst things always happen late in the session. So as people start getting tired or too.
Well, yeah, that's right. That's right. That was a good one. Probably had we been playing it in a campaign, probably would have been better to say, let's pick this up from here, next week when people are refreshed and don't feel, because you're right, toward the end of a session, people are like, screw it. And look, the other thing is they knew it was a play test, right? These were not their beloved characters. And so there is a little bit more, much like a con. If you play at a con game and you're down to about an hour left, what do you got to lose? What's the point of like not making it to the end, at the end of the game? So it's like, fine, I just open the door. I'm not going to bother listening yet. I'm just going to open the door.
Everything's Leroy Jenkins at that point.
Exactly. So let's just make something happen. Even if we die in the last hour, at least we die and we have fun and there is a big fight. So I mean, like I said, I think it's a neat mix of old school and new school in that regard. And I think players who are big fans of the games that were in the 80s should enjoy it. But I think it's not going to be frustrating for new players or people who are not used to that, as long as they sort of take it seriously and thoughtfully. Because I don't know, for me, when I play, the most enjoyable events that I can think of when I've been a player is when I figured something out. Not when I just happened to roll a 20 or something, and it's like, because that's just luck of the dice, right? That just it happens. Just like the ones happen sometime, the 20s happen sometime, and those are fun to recount. But it's when you sit there and you go, wait a minute, I look over there, and it's like, that's what you need to do to find this out. And those to my mind are the most satisfying moments of gaming. And there's a lot of those here where you get a chance to just, where if you put your brain into gear, you'll go, I get it.
Yeah, last week we kind of did a video on that, and it's the idea that modern gaming, there's a lot of like, let me make this check instead of going like, I want to make this check, but how would my character do that? How does that, what would facilitate that check? And really, you can just remove the check part of it out of it altogether and just be like, well, I want to figure something out, and then let the DM decide if you need to make a check or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's oftentimes, and I do like the 5e like tool set that we have in order to kind of be more creative with what we do and give you different ways of thinking about it. Unlike the earlier editions, like you didn't have a lot of this background information to kind of say, this is what your character can do. So when you can kind of like marry those two things together with, trying to challenge yourself as a player and not just the character, you could be, you can think about it a little bit deeper. Like I had a character that was, it was proficient in, masonry or mining tools or something. And, there was kind of like a logic puzzle where you're trying to figure out like this broken statue. I'm like, well, can I use my knowledge of surveying to like figure out where this statue would have stood and how it would have looked, when it was whole, to try and get an idea where it was pointing to before or whatever. So like, I feel like we can do more things like that. And, as GMs, like maybe sometimes you don't ask them to make a check at all. You're just like, oh, that's a good point. This is what information you would have, right off the bat.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, and as a DM, I definitely take the view that if a player sort of nails it, if they've got a decent skill at something and they ask you just the right question, I'm inclined to either just give them the information or say, make a roll and the DC is like 8.
Yeah.
Because you nailed it and you've already got a +7, so you can't fail anyway or something. It's just, you should reward the times when the players are just really on their game. But that being said, it's also worth sometimes saying, look, their characters presumably know their skills much better than the players. So I also think it's fair sometimes to just say, look, tell me how you're going to do it. I don't know. I'm just looking around. Well, make a roll and I'll make the DC higher in that case. But if they get it, also give them the information, because presumably their character knows more than they do. And I think it's fair to do that. But I think good player play should be rewarded. and they shouldn't be penalized because they happen to roll poorly when they actually figured exactly what they were supposed to be looking for. So I agree with you. I think in that case, I'd say, oh yeah, that's a good point. You look around and you determine that the statue was originally in the northwest corner or something like that, and its arm was pointing up, and so that would be a hint, presumably, to where you might look.
I think like as GMs and players, we always have to be thinking about like what kind of play do we want at our table,
right?
And like encourage it, right? Or you're going to get the opposite of that a lot of times.
That's
so.
Right.
So, how long have you been writing for Frog God now, and do you write for other companies as well?
So far, right now it's been I guess a little over 3 years approximately that I've been working on. I spent about a year and a half or so on World of the Lost Lands. Spent a year on Necropolis. There was actually some time in between. I've been working on a couple other projects that are still sort of in the hopper, because this isn't always where these things come out linearly. It depends. So there's one project that I was project managing that is on abeyance right now. There's another one. Actually, there's two that are sort of in that situation. So it's been, like I said, probably a little over 3 years effectively that I've been doing this. I've yet to write for anybody else. That may happen at some point or not, but I've actually had I've been given a lot of freedom to the frogs to do what I want to do. I think if I'd said no, that would have been fine to these things. It was kind of, these are two really interesting challenges. The first one, to create a compendium of a world, was really kind of cool and really hit me in the fact that I've created multiple campaign worlds in my gaming life. It was kind of like, yeah, I can do that. I've done it. At least
they started you off with a small project.
Yeah, exactly, small project. And then look, when somebody says, here's something that Gary Gygax wrote, do better. That was kind of like a wow. Okay, sure, I'll give that a try. I have said to the guys there, though, to Bill and Zach Glazer, that my next project is going to be something totally on my own. And I think I actually know what it's going to be. I need to work on it. And I've got to, this one's taken up a big chunk of time. But the next one's going to be something of my own design and I'm going to set it in the part of the Lost Lands that has, as far as I know, never been explored in any written product at all, other than what is included in the world book. That it was something that was created without having had any modules or adventures in that area. So a chance to explore something completely new on my own. So that's probably my next project after I get this one done, and I probably take like a couple of weeks break because it's intense. This stuff is very intense. And we still have a little bit of stuff that needs to be done that I still need to proof. I mean, the book's in layout, so I still need to proof the layout version. It's still in conversion to Swords and Wizardry, so I've got to look at the Swords and Wizardry version. There's a DM screen that you can get at high levels, and I need to. I've already sent the mock-up of that out, but I'll need to proof that when it comes back. So there's still a handful of stuff that I need to do on this project before I'll be able to say, yeah, it's in bed.
How far away are you from making partner at Frog God?
I don't think they'd want me in that role, to be honest. It'd probably be too much of a pain. No, I at this point, I'm totally happy to be a freelancer basically, and to do these oddball projects, and we'll see what happens next. That's I don't have I don't have a need to do these things financially, fortunately, which is a good thing because you don't make a lot of money in this industry. But so I can actually do things that I find fun and enjoyable, which is a great position to be in. So we'll see what happens next.
Now, for anyone who's not familiar, Frag God Games is a very weird company structure for an RPG company. They're put together like a law firm or an accounting firm, as opposed to a traditional RPG company. So That's me just being a little bit of a smartass too. So,
That's okay. That's okay. Well, look, I could see Bill offering me some ownership interest. Say,
yeah,
I don't want to pay anything. Just I'll give you some ownership interest in the
yeah.
company.
Here's some stock.
Non-tradable.
Yeah.
That's
Are
what I
you
need.
um are you playing other RPGs? Or are you pretty much all D&D and Swords and Wizardry right now?
So my home campaign is 5e, in large part because I just wanted to try it initially. I started playing first edition. That was well, technically I started playing Holmes the Holmes basic set, from the Holmes box set. But I quickly moved on to first edition. I played first edition AD&D for a long time. Um, Interesting enough, we eventually segued from first edition AD&D to Rollmaster, for those who know Rollmaster, also known as Chartmaster because of the vast number of charts that it has. And I played that for a long time. And then when I finally decided, as things were sort of winding down a bit, and I was heading more toward retirement, I had a little more time for gaming. And that was when I decided, fifth edition has come out. I missed second, I missed third, I missed 3.5, never played Pathfinder, I missed fourth. I'll try this fifth edition thing. And I happen to like it as a system. It's got its limitations, like any game system does, but I like it a lot because it's a very coherent rule system. And so I've been running a campaign in that for quite some time. Uh, I'll be honest, my other favorite system, and I have written a couple of adventures that I've just played with friends at this point, and otherwise gamed in. It's Call of Cthulhu. I really like Call of Cthulhu. It's a lot of fun because, and again, this sort of gets back in many ways to what we were talking about earlier. Yeah, you've got skills obviously because it's based upon sort of the basic role playing platform, but you generally don't have superpowers. You generally don't have magic. How do you succeed in a Call of Cthulhu game? You use your brain. You ask the right questions of the keeper. You solve the puzzle. You figure out what's going on. And then, of course, you usually go insane or die, but that's sort of par for the course in the game. But again, that's another one where, when you come up with the right thing, with the right answer, you figure out who's really behind it, or you figure out where you're supposed to go. And yeah, I just that really I find that very satisfying. So a lot of the cons, I just recently signed up for events actually at Game Hall, which is coming up in October, and I think with one exception, everything I signed up for is Call of Cthulhu. So that's become my new con game of the month, I guess, whatever. But
So,
that's kind of about it. I dabbled in Harnmaster once. If you want to
mhm.
talk about an obscure game, I tried running a Harnmaster campaign once. I've played that a couple of times. I played a number of things, but
So had you taken a long hiatus and come back, or had you just been playing those games the whole time?
you know, for a lot of the times when I was working, like a lot of people, I didn't have the time. We would game, um, you know, rare occasions, or we like find like I take part of a vacation and game during it. Um, but I really had slowed down dramatic, like a lot of people during when I was working. There are a lot of demands. Married, I got young kids. I'm going to kids events when I can, and I had an extremely demanding job. I was traveling a lot. I was in the office a lot, so the time just wasn't there. So it really was a matter of just not having the time. And the friends that I had that I was still gaming with were preferred the games we'd started with, which is why first edition and Rollmaster were sort of our go-tos. I really discovered Call of Cthulhu at some point. I think at one of the cons, I just signed up for one and had a blast. I tried to go to conventions, and I've been going to, for the last decade or so, I've been going to like North Texas and Gary Con. I've been going on and off to Gen Con. Like I said, my first Gen Con was a long time ago. But there are also a number of years I didn't go to Gen Con because work interfered and I just didn't have time. So it's great to finally be back playing a lot. Although it'd be nice to play, it's finally actually, what's really great is actually playing in person again after a year plus of playing on Zoom, which is okay, but it's just not the same. It's great to finally be playing in person. And I was at North Texas back in June, and it was just phenomenal being with people again and getting to game again with, my friends that I hadn't seen in a long time.
So Phil Swift, Destroyer of Worlds, had asked earlier, what your thoughts were about AD&D, and apparently you kind of got to it anyway, because you'd been essentially still playing AD&D.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think first edition is great. I mean, it is a playable game. It is a very playable game. The complication of first edition is that it's a bunch of ad hoc rules put together. The modern game design of 5e, Pathfinder second edition, whatever, is everything is a roll plus a bonus against a target number, and that's everything.
And you always want high.
And you always want high. In AD&D, you've got separate rules for everybody's got a different progression of experience points. The spells, how many spells you get differ from character to character, based upon level. There's a separate set of rules that look nothing like nothing else for thieves. There's a separate set of rules for assassins. There's a separate, certain powers are given to rangers or paladins that look like nothing else that anybody else has. And that makes sense, right? I mean, this thing was written in the very late 70s, putting together rules that had been put together by different individuals for different circumstances when they were trying to bring characters together. Look at the psionic rules, or how the bard works, or the monk. It's like nothing else. No other character class or no other power in the system. I still think it all works, with the only exception that I could think of being the surprise system. Anybody who says that they understand how surprise works in first edition is simply lying. Nobody can figure out how surprise works. Everybody has to home rule that one. But I think it's a very playable game. And the one thing that I think it still has, to my mind, over 5e, and the one disadvantage of the rule being, you roll and you always have to want high and you're always going against the target. There was something a little more magical about first edition. There was something a little more unexpected. It seemed as if things were just a little bit more random, maybe in a few ways. And that was kind of nice. I kind of liked that in how first edition worked. And there is sort of a mystical feel to the game. I mean, it's never been, frankly, in my view, surpassed from what's in the Holmes box set. I mean, the Holmes box set, it just feels like magic. And I feel like 5e is more mechanical. Again, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it makes it a more playable game, makes it a heck of a lot easier to teach somebody. In some ways, first edition AD, trying to teach somebody first edition AD&D is kind of like trying to teach a non-native English speaker English. It's like, all these words that should sound the same don't, even though they're spelled exactly the same. How many ways can you pronounce L-E-A-D, and how many meanings does that word have? Is it lead? Is it lead? Is it a metal? Are you taking somebody and leading them around? It's so first edition AD&D is a little bit like that. You have to know the rules to know the rules, and learning them is just a matter of time and experience. But I liked it, and I still play it occasionally. from time to time. Most of my friends at this point, with one exception, have sort of graduated to 5e, but I still think there's a lot to be said for a 1e game.
1E in second edition had a lot less rules than we have now and mechanics, but the ones that they did have were generally needlessly complex for complexity's sake, right? Like it's like when the designers in the early days, it very much felt like they just wanted to like show off how smart they were, and also it's like being a doctor or a lawyer where you come up with a different language that the layman doesn't understand to kind of articulate things, but also there's a built-in part of it of just elevating your status.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I can't speak for the people who wrote it, but yeah, I mean, look, most of the people who play this game are probably, I would guess, on the more intelligent side on the spectrum of intelligence in the nation. That'd be kind of my gut. And I think there is a tendency to try to complicate things. I mean, I there was one horrible point in my life where I decided I didn't like any combat system that had ever been done. And so I'm going to come up with my own, and I'm going to come up with a combat system that works second by second. So its reality was perfect. It really would be the perfect combat simulation, and it was an unmitigated disaster. My friends and I played it once. We literally, it took us like 12 hours, and I think the combat lasted about 23 seconds. It was absolutely insane. And I said, I'm never doing this again. But it's look, it's the traditional issue of playability versus realism. And
I hate that word.
People complain all the time about, but I think for me, is it playable, and does it enable you to understand what's happening and have results that make sense from the perspective of what you've tried to describe. If you can get to that point, trying to say that, well, this is just not realistic. Well, yeah, okay, it's not realistic, but it works, and it makes sense, and it's giving you results that make sense. To my mind, that's what's important. But like I said, you also lose a little bit of the magic. I mean, fifth edition magic is kind of like science. You know exactly what's going to happen. You know exactly how long it's going to take. There's only a few random aspects to it. There is a little bit to be said for having a little bit of uncertainty in things other than like the duration of potions. But that's, like I said, that to my mind, that's a minor quibble.
No, I agree. Like I missed a lot of the randomness that came from earlier editions, but also like you're like, this is more realistic, and like, the more realistic things get, generally, in my experience and opinion, they're less fun, right? Because you're like, oh, you just got stabbed. What does that mean? In a realistic system, it means you're dead, and now you can go off to the corner and make a new character.
Right.
And that's just not, to me, that's not fun. Like I prefer things that are more action hero now as I get older than realistic, I guess.
I think that's right. I mean, I feel the same way. That being said, you still want, like I said, you want it to be grounded enough that if you describe an action, the resolution system makes sense for the action you described, and it's not going to give you a result that's like, well, that's not at all what I meant to happen. You can understand why you might have a mishap if you roll poorly, but yeah, I agree with you. I mean, in the end, that's what the system is about. And of course, if you ask the old guys, like Tim Kask about hit points, the point is the point isn't that your average 10th level fighter can take 7 stabs to the chest. It's that the first 6 are only scratches, and only the 7th actually hits. That the hit points does not mean here's how much damage you can physically take from something. It's all the hit points before you get to the end are a combination of your luck and avoidance and endurance and ability to prevent that blow from actually sinking into your chest. It's just that last one that actually does. And that's, that I think is how they looked at hit points originally. And we sometimes think of it instead as sort of a gas tank.
Yeah.
Each point from the first to the last means the exact same thing. And that's not really what it was originally intended to mean.
Yeah. Doug in the chat, worst named game mechanic ever.
Which one was that? Hit points?
Hit points, yeah.
That's probably right. I mean, there's probably a better way to describe it too, but that was how they did it at the time because of how they were building. And look, let's be honest. I mean, talk about an invention that has lasted.
They're laying the tracks as the train was going. So yeah.
Yeah, but but that's one that it's gone from first edition or from OD&D, the original box set, all the way to video games at this point. Everybody thinks hit points or hits or however you want to do it, or health or whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing. Some of these inventions, it's incredible how enduring they are.
Gary has screwed up many of an industry with those two words.
Yep. No, that's right.
Which is awesome. The legacy of Dungeons and Dragons. So you mentioned being a father. So have you produced any gamers?
So it's interesting. None of my kids ever showed any interest in tabletop. I mean, all three of them, I got three boys, and my youngest is in college, to give you a sense for age. They obviously all play video games and have always played video games. None of them showed any interest in tabletop games until only my oldest, when he was in high school, found some friends and they started playing Pathfinder. And he still plays to this day. He still plays. I think they play 5th edition and they play 1st edition Pathfinder are the games that they still play. And he and I went to a number of Gen Cons together. He's gamed with me a couple of times, but he generally sticks with his own friends. And it's interesting to me because I hear a lot about the differences between old school and new school, and I've listened into him and his friends play a couple times. It's all about role playing for them. The system is almost secondary. Watching them play is really it's really interesting because it's about the character interactions for them, and it's not just people complain that new school is all tactics, and it's not. It really isn't. So I think we blow out of proportion sometimes the difference between how people play and what they're looking for, because what my son's looking for and what I'm looking for from the games are very similar.
I feel like if anything, the game's going far more narrative than anything. Yeah. Like when we first started playing, there was a fairly good chance you would just start at the entrance to a dungeon, right? Mm-hmm. Like I don't remember shopping episodes. Like, and if there was anything having to do with dealing with NPCs, it was usually like the DM's way of making your life more complicated. Like you have magic items and maybe he'll let you find a wizard's tower that you could go to and pay them a lot of money to learn what your magic item did.
Yeah. No, and look, that's a lot of old school too, right? I mean, it's and that's very much similar to what I think the original concept behind a lot of what Gary did. On the other hand, if you go back all the way, you also see, like from the Blackmore campaign with Dave Arneson and aspects of Gary's early campaign, a lot of stuff about people building keeps and forming fiefdoms and having and it became a lot of that too. So even back then there was certainly a lot of this more than just go into the dungeon, kill a bunch of monsters, and then go out and level up. There was a lot of that. And I know at some point I segued from the episodic where I'd create a dungeon, I'd run the group through it, and then it's like the next time we played, I'd have a new dungeon, right? And it was like there was no, the characters were continuous, but there was nothing else. And then I created my first campaign world, and that grew and grew and grew until it was absolutely enormous. And I had volumes of stuff that I had written, and there was a whole overarching history to it, because of course we all spent way too much time reading the Silmarillion and deciding I need to have my campaign world just as dense. And I created one just as dense in many ways, which was a lot of fun. And that was sort of a different thing. But I see the same thing in my son, trying to create an overarching narrative of the world and his players' role in that world, and then how they interact with NPCs. So it's always been there, but there's also always been the school of go into the dungeon, kill a bunch of creatures, get beat up, drag out your wounded and your dead, get everybody healed up, get somebody raised, and go back. And there's something to be said for that too. Sometimes that can be fun.
I got a chance to play in a game run by Stefan Picorni a couple years back, and like it had been the first time I played first edition, or his version of first edition. And like, I mean, we all had our own version, essentially, is how it worked anyway. In decades, and it was so much fun, and it had like the perfect ending. And that was like one of the characters either had the spell or had a magic item for lightning bolt, cast it through all the enemies, then it hit the wall, bounced, and it hit all the enemies again, plus most of the party, killing all the enemies and most of the party.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, that was the most AD&D moment ever.
Was that using his Dwarven Forge stuff?
Yeah. It's this castle scenario that he runs.
Yeah. Fortunately, not everybody gets to play in those, but I know they stream those, and the Dwarven Forge. I think there are some people who probably have decided to forego owning a house because of the amount of money they've put into Dwarven Forge.
But you need a house in order to store it. That's
right. That's right. But I mean, it is phenomenal stuff. And I've played in a few of Stefan's games, and they are definitely experiences, and they're visual and tactile in a way that most gaming, which is more theater of the mind, even if you're using minis, it's not the same than when you have his stuff. So that is and he is definitely an interesting, fun DM. Absolutely. And it is traditional. What's the famous line of every mage? I didn't ask how big the room is. I said I cast fireball.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's definitely things like that I miss from the early editions. Third edition kind of killed random encounters. And ever since then, they've never really truly come back to what they used to be. It used to be like, this is the world, so this is what you would find in that area. And very much like with the fireball, I didn't ask how big the room was. I didn't ask what level your characters were. If it's a forest, there might be a green dragon in it, or there might be 2 kobolds. Whatever.
There definitely was certainly a lot of that really random aspect. Although, I know as a DM, sometimes you get a little tired of that. And I would certainly roll it up. And it's like, if I've got a bunch of 9th level, 10th level characters wandering around, I'm going to skip the random encounter with the 2 kobolds, which in the old days, I probably would have made them play out. But now it's like, that's not worth it. And then, if you have the 1st level and 2nd level characters and you roll the green dragon, I probably would have it pass by and leave them unmolested rather than have them attack, because, we just rolled up characters. We don't have to roll up new ones.
Well, yes and no, kind of like it forced players to think differently about the game.
Right.
You see a dragon, if a 5e or 3rd edition, beyond player sees a dragon, they're like, oh, well, obviously we're meant to fight this, and they assume it's something they can beat. Prior to that, went, oh, you know what? Where can I hide? Can I crawl into a crevice someplace?
There is very much something, and that may be a little bit more of the old school. I mean, the true old school, and I played for a while in one campaign that really was old school, where I was the player, not the DM. And it was literally, for the first 2 or 3 levels, it was literally go into the dungeon, go into one room, fight the creatures, take the little treasure you found, and leave because the party's nearly dead. The next day you go in, you explore one more room, you fight the creatures, you flee. It was very much a, running away, learning when to run away was just as important as learning when to fight, because, you had to sometimes say, we can't handle this encounter, because we're either too beat up or whatever. And you're right. I think there's more of an expectation now that the challenges you face are always challenges that the party can succeed at. I would note, one of the things I learned in writing Necropolis, I tried initially, because I was in converting it over to 5e, I needed to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to scale these encounters? And I tried to use the challenge rating system in 5e. Oh my God, that was a disaster. That was a complete mess. It did not work. When I play tested the encounters using the CR system, as a general matter, the party simply mopped the floor with the monsters. And so I realized I really had to think a lot more thoughtfully about how to scale the encounters to make them work and be challenges, but not also kill them.
What was the most encounters you tested in one sit-in?
The most encounters?
Like, for instance, like in some of your play testing, like, was it like, okay, we're going to do 8 rooms, and they had to fight through many of them?
No, what I basically did was there were certain segments of the adventure that I really wanted to see how the party responded to.
Yeah.
Part of it was so there's a part in the village that you start in that I wanted to see. Well, how are they going to explore the village? How are they going to find people to talk to? How much time are they going to spend talking to people? Are they going to find the people they're supposed to find? So I that was an open-ended one. And that gave me some insight as to describing a couple things as to how certain things happened there. There was an overland section that I play tested where I wanted to see how the party explored in the wilderness or traveled the road, and how did they handle that. And there was a big combat in that one. So I think the village was one session, for example. This overland one was another session. There's a place that you can explore. I think it's described in the Kickstarter, so it isn't a surprise, called the Temple of Osiris. And I wanted to explore that one. And the party actually got through a good chunk of it. I mean, which has a whole bunch of different encounters and tricks and traps. They didn't get anywhere near through the whole thing, but we spent a good 6 hours there. And then I also took the same party through, and I actually play tested that with another group, totally separate group. And then I did the main tomb with 2 different groups. And one of them was like it was a 6 or a 8 hour session. So there's a lot of rooms you can get through in that time period. So these were some long sessions that I ended up play testing. But the goal was to more see how the party reacted to things and then decide whether or not, there are a couple things, for example, that I just realized that, what I thought was like a self-evident thing that you could figure out. Mm-hmm. Everybody seemed to like completely run their head up against a brick wall and have no idea what to do. And so I realized I needed to provide some better hints. It doesn't mean it's easy, but I was able to see how the party thought, how the players thought about it. So that helped me figure out, how do I change this to reflect how a group might actually, explore that area. And there are some places where I just said, wow, I thought this encounter was going to kill the party, and they literally, were done in 3 rounds and there wasn't an injury in the party. That doesn't work. And there was another one where they just, looked like they were going to die. Actually, that one I left alone because I think, like I said, and earlier, that was the early one I talked about, they didn't go in prepared. And I think that's the consequence for not going in prepared is, your party might not get out, or they might be captured. Obviously the DM can do a number of different things to give a party a second chance, right? Let them be captured and have their items taken from them, and let them figure out how to escape.
Yeah. So I guess the reason I ask is because I feel like our groups don't play the way the designers kind of intend the challenge system to work, right? Like, so if you're not playing throughout a day of adventuring with multiple encounters, the challenge system completely breaks down. Because in our groups it's like we might do like 2 to 3 combat encounters in any given
Right.
session.
Right.
And
Although I'm always happy if the party says and they can figure out a way to do it. We want to rest.
yeah,
You want a short rest because you need your which one is it? The warlock to get their spells back, or we need a long rest so everybody gets their spells back. I'm always happy to allow that to happen. Now, whether there's a random encounter chance in the night or not is a separate issue. Depends upon where they're at. But I've had there was at least one situation I can think of where basically they had one series of sort of connected encounters and it was like, we need to rest. And I said, yeah, but it's like 10 in the morning.
yeah, yeah.
And it's like, I know, but we're out of everything. And it's like, okay, then they needed to call it quits for the day and rest. And I said, well, but you can't just go to bed at 10 in the morning,
Yeah.
and wake up 8 hours later and start playing again. You're going to have to take a day, and that may have consequences. It may allow the opponents to understand, to realize that you're there and take appropriate actions, but you may not have a choice, depending upon how it goes. I mean, there is a challenge to killing 5e characters if only one or two are really threatened, because you get all the death saves, and at high enough levels you'll have either powerful healing or raises. But it can be done if you get enough of the party in trouble. And there's a couple places where that could happen. And one of the points that I actually make multiple times in the manuscript is the DM's going to have to use a lot of discretion. They know their players, I don't. This is a challenging adventure for a DM. And I know some people will say, oh, you got to run the game as written or you're somehow cheating. It's like, why? I wrote the game. Am I any smarter than you or any other person who's going to who's going to DM the game? I don't think so. And if you think an encounter isn't written well or doesn't work or it doesn't work for your party, go ahead and change it. Use your discretion. There's no fun to walk into a dungeon and have the ceiling fall and everybody to die, in the first round. There's no point in that. So everybody who runs this is going to have to use their own discretion. And I actually lay out a number of places in sort of advice boxes for the DM where, if you've got a party that may be mismatched for the challenge, and there are certain things in 5e that make a huge difference, especially at higher levels. Do you have a paladin in the party? If you have a paladin in the party, everybody's getting a +3 or a +4 to their saves.
Or that 5, but yeah, it makes a huge difference.
It makes a huge difference when you're dealing with magical and other types of traps. And if you don't have a paladin, you may need to take that into account when you're trying to decide consequences, or the party is going to get wiped out. Or conversely, you might have a paladin and have to take that into account, because otherwise the party is going to waltz through the adventure, depending upon how it all lays out. The DM's got to make those judgments. And the mere fact that I made a judgment as to what the DC for something is doesn't mean that somehow I found that written in stone and am revealing the truth to the DM.
Carved on a tablet someplace.
Yeah, that's just not so. This is actually one, to play on an earlier theme. This is actually one where I think the DM's got to be, on his or her game too, to make this work. This is going to be challenging for the DM to run, just as it is challenging for the players to play, because you've got to be thoughtful about what's going on and be playing it. And there's a lot to pay attention. This is a complicated adventure with some very complicated history that you need to understand and reflect. Nobody could sort of pick this book up and start reading with a group in front of them and run it. You've got to read this book and understand what's going on before you you run a game in this thing, at least later on. So, but like I said, it's I think it's a good mix of old school and new school. So I think hopefully people have fun. So back it. Please.
And there's a link in the description as always. And on that note, we're also like 10 past, so it's that time.
Sorry about that.
No worries, man. No worries at all.
Yeah, no, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate the time. Like I said, this is if anything, from being the guy who used to buy these adventures and then either run them or more likely steal from them in my own campaigns. Just oh, I love this encounter. I love this idea. I think we've got over, it's like 1,100 or 10,000 or 1,040 something people who've backed it so far. And that's really humbling. I have to say, it's kind of cool that many people are going to get a copy of this work and will hopefully read it and enjoy it and be able to play it. And it's a lot of fun to be on this other side, being creative and being able to share this and to work with so many creative people, from the artists to the cartographers, to the other folks at Frag and Necromancer. It's a lot of fun, and I hope people back it because I think this is a good product and I think you'll enjoy it. And it's humbling to be able to get that out in the public and let people, hopefully use it and have fun with it.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. And everyone go check out Frag Games and Necropolis. There's a link down in the description as always. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And until next time, everyone, stay nerdy.